Hello, everyone. Hello. I'm here. I think I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. All right. Welcome to the Erudition Network. We are back on this week. On this Veterans Day. I'm very excited that today is Veterans Day, and we have an episode of Erudition to put on during Veterans Day. We have been kind of out of here for the last few weeks, and I want to address that. We had a issue with an individual, a racist, let's call it. Let's not beat around the bush, who decided to um, make a false claim against the channel in order to get us taken off. Um, it took a little bit of time to resolve that issue, but it has been resolved, and apologies have been sent by YouTube and different individuals who got involved to help us get back on the air on YouTube. But that being said, YouTube is not where our largest following comes from. Majority of our viewers watch through Facebook, but there are a few who do come on and watch with YouTube. But I want us to grow that YouTube audience. One thing that I learned from that whole situation was that it angered someone so badly what we're talking about in regard to Black history and knowledge, that they dared to go and try to come up with an elaborate scheme in order to have the channel removed. That says a lot about what we're doing and what we're trying to accomplish here with the Erudition Network. I have great and grandiose ideas of what I want to do with this network, and I think that over time we will get where we need to get to. But that being said, that idiot, and I'm going to call it that because that was an idiotic thing to do, did not stop where our progress or where we are. Well, today is Veterans Day. I am, if you don't know this, I served 20 years in the military, in the Navy specifically, as an intelligence analyst. I have given a large part of my adult life to the serving of this nation, and it is not a regret. I do not regret any moment of it. There is much honor and joy in serving your country. And the thing that always stuck with me throughout my time in service, no matter what the heartache, the hell, the hardship, being away from my wife and my children, being sometimes in places that are in harm's way. And one thing that I held on to was the heredity, the history, the ancestry of that. It is such a great thing to know that, you carried a torch for a while for a long history of African American men and women who served this nation. And I say that because Blacks, service members, to me, and I don't say this to diminish or to say that white service members didn't serve as honorably, but when you have to serve in a country that historically has not loved you, has not reverenced you, has not tried to do right by your culture or your people, and at many occasions has actually slaughtered people in your culture who are returning back from fighting the very wars to protect and serve the purposes of this nation. It is it is something to carry. It is something to consider. And there's never a time in my service that I did not consider that I did not think about that reality. Um, see, Daniel, thank you. Hey, Mike, what's going on? Yeah, it's all squared away. I appreciate it. One of the things I wanted to talk about today, and I had actually asked, and I didn't do such a good job, excuse me, Justice Chair. I think this week, given a lot of things that I had going on, I should have done a better job of trying to get some of my veteran friends to tune in. Maybe they'll tune in later and watch the replay as it goes on YouTube and Facebook. But I wanted them to come on and try to provide some other thoughts on what I am presenting and what I'm going to talk about today. And what are we going to talk about today? Well, Veterans Day, which was once Armistice Day, is an important time to reflect, because if you were to ask a lot of Americans, um, they judge their history by wars. If you don't believe that, go. I dare you, for you young folks out there and for you older folks, go find a history book from your kids or look at your history book and see how they hop skip through history based on wars, right? And so every war, from the Revolutionary War to any conflicts that we had leading up to the Civil War, Spanish American War, different, you will see that there's times that they mark off presidencies, laws, prosperity based on wars. Before World War II, we were in the Great Depression, right? And so a lot of people go talk about the Great Depression, but then they talk about how World War II helped to push America outside of what was a starving country to be a world leader. So we base a lot of our history on warfare or conflict. And so the soldier, the sailor, the airman, the Marine, right, who serves this country, is furthering the ideas of America, right? And so the question then becomes, how can African Americans, why do you believe, and I'm going to ask you as an audience, why do you believe that African Americans could serve in a military where they knew, one, that they were going to be treated secondary? Most times before, during the original beginnings of the conflicts, they were not even allowed to fight. And then because of significance and need, by whatever the country's need was, they allowed them to come in and fight. So I want to have an idea. I want to get an interactive opinion from you all who are out there that are watching, and tell me what is your thoughts on how people of color, I won't just say African Americans, people of color can fight for a country that shows them still to this day that they see them as secondary. Anybody can answer that. I won't labor on it too long, but I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to be interactive and answer. Mike. Whoa, that's a heck of a statement. I do not agree with that statement at all. Okay, so you said that someone told you that you can't be Black and patriotic. What does that mean? So then I would ask, what is patriotism to that person? Because we never want white people or anyone else to say that we never fought for this country. Thus, we can't deserve respect. Okay? Tyson. Selfless service. I need to show that we are not less than, that we can stand in the front line and prove who we actually are, prove that we are better than what they think of us. That's a great statement, my brother. And I that's from a veteran who understands. They fought because they wanted to fight for the country they lived in. Okay, that is true. I don't know how to respond. I will. So let me tell you, patriotism, to me, I hear that word thrown around so much in society now. The situations that have happened politically, people walk around with flags and they say they're patriots, right? Because of their political views or their thought process. But let me tell you something. A patriot, if you look at the idea of what a patriot is actually supposed to be, people, that is a rarity. That is a person who is going to fight to the end, right, to support a country and its ideals, and is prepared to defend it with their life from any enemies, both internally and externally. I think my brother Tyson kind of basically broke that down. That has nothing to do, right, with your idea of being Black. Because if you think about that, Blacks, right, let's go back and look at Salem Poor. Let's look at William Salem. Let's look at these folks who fought in Bunker Hill at the beginning, at the revolution of this war. Let's look at Crispus Attucks, right? Let's look at these people who laid their lives down in a country where slavery was still the letter of the law. But they believed in the ideals of that time. They believed that the idea of America, the promise of America, was such that it could be better, right? It can grow into this democracy that it claims that it wants to be, without a king, without authority, and that even a small individual, a person that's born in poverty, a person that's born with barely making it, could rise to be a general, could rise to be somebody who defends this country and serves an honorable life. And so there is, to me, no greater patriot than an African American who would go out and serve his country and would give his life, knowing that that the country that he's fighting for does not see him as a man or as a woman, and has killed and murdered people that look just like him. And we're going to get into a little bit of that in this hour. And so when we talk about patriotism, yes, you can be a patriot to the ideas of America. Does that mean that America meets all those ideas every day? No. But my thousands of brothers and sisters who served this country, and those who have gave everything with the idea, like Tyson said, we are not what you make us out to be. The Fighting 54th, right, who went out and gave their lives to show that we are men. We are patriotic. We believe in justice and fairness. You know, earlier today, I posted something on Erudition from a private Merrill Monroe. Merle in 1942 wrote an article that he sent to the Pittsburgh Courier, because in 1942, post World War II, there were still lynchings, there were still things happening in this country that were atrocious to Black servicemen. And he wrote that, paradoxically enough, our country spends millions annually in an effort to build up Black morale, both in and out of the army, yet foolishly destroys the blueprints of its program by tolerating brutal killings without even the pretense of a fair trial. And I thought about that when I was looking up things for this episode, and I thought about Merrill, and I thought about that statement I'd seen several times as I was going through history, but I pulled it back up because I was like, that needs to be shared. He also went on to say that the morale of the Black, as with any human being, is like a yeast to bread. Morale puffs us up with love and pride of our country. It puffs us up with the will to fight, to resist any change by force to our way of life. Morale is, in a broad sense, is knowledge and understanding of, and the faith in the high principles of our country that it must represent. The right to live our lives unhampered by strings of prejudice. The right to earn bread, a place in the sun for us and our children. And with these necessary stimulants, Black soldiers will resist with every inch of our stature any threat to our country's laws that must protect our rights during periods of tranquility. And that means internally and externally. So when we come back from fighting for this nation as Black men and women, we didn't lose that sense of morale. We didn't lose that sense of patriotism. That's never lost. As a matter of fact, we hold the country to a higher standard because we know what we were willing to give for the country. And so when you see through history, Black servicemen being beaten, killed, murdered, harassed, even to this day. Several years ago, I was one of the anti-terrorism force protection leaders on base. And what that meant was after 9/11, making sure that we knew what the threat levels were. And I had to brief service members, predominantly members of color, that if you went out in town in your uniform, everybody would not greet you with hugs and smiles, depending on where you were. Because there had been incidents where people had spit on of brown and black service members. There were moments where threats had been told. People told them to take that uniform off. And you can go on YouTube and see videos of people too and talk about, why are you wearing my uniform? The country is full of loonies, right? Who never understand and never want to see people of color in uniforms. And so we have to address these things. So if you're one of those that are sitting out here listening to Erudition going, why are we talking about this? That's back in the day. No, that's today. That's today. We had an incident, the incidents of terrorism that have happened where service members have been killed in this country, and it is not necessarily talked about. Simply because they're standing outside or whatever, and this has happened. But the reality of it is we still serve. We still take pride in serving and showing people. I always liked when young folks look at you and say, thank you for your service, and see you in that uniform. And it does something for them. People of color support America, but America doesn't necessarily support people of color. That is, unfortunately, Daniel, there's truth to that. There's too much truth to that. And unfortunately, when we bring these things up, a lot of people turn off. You know, I often say that a lot of people, when they watch Erudition, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. People watch it and say to themselves, whoa, what are we talking about here? Right? Are you being racist? You know, are you being too separatist? Are you prejudiced? None of that. I've never given you a prejudiced thought here. Before we went off the air with that situation, I had talked about white male patriarchy. And I got some responses, even from some of my own family, like, hey, you know, no, I don't. I'm going to give you the facts. Now it's up to you if you're going to accept those facts, if you're going to embrace that wisdom, if you're going to go out there and study on your own. Because one thing about me that you will know is that I will never give you something that I will not tell you to go find and look up on your own. That is not who I am. But I am, by nature, intolerant of ignorance. I'm intolerant of the idea that we perpetuate ignorant beliefs and ignorant studies because we're too afraid to speak about truth. And there's truth on this Veterans Day that we need to talk about, that we need to address. We have to be flexible in that. We have to be open to that. The other thing that I was reading actually about an hour before we did this show. I don't know if anybody knows the name of Charles Lewis. Probably not, because a lot of people. But Charles Lewis was in the papers, was well known about 100 years ago. But Charles Lewis is a case that stands out because what happened was in 1918. About a month, this is sad, about a month after the Armistice Day, which, as we know now is called Veterans Day, Charles Lewis was released. He got out of the military. He checked out from somewhere in Ohio. I think it was Camp Sherman, if I remember off the top of my head. And he was from a small town in Kentucky. And so he went back to Kentucky. And about a little month after him returning, around December 15th, I'm going to say December 15th, but it might have been 16th, in 1918, people were upset about Charles. Charles, he didn't have much, so he wore his uniform. He was proud of his service. So he walked around in his uniform from World War I. But on December 15th or 16th of 1918, a police officer broke into Charles's home, a shack, really what they called in the newspaper. And they accused him of a robbery. And Charles stood up in his uniform and he told the man, he said, hey, look, I have a right as a soldier. I fought for this country. I didn't steal anything. I haven't done anything. I'm not a vagabond. I'm not a bum. And he resisted arrest. And when the officers tried to arrest him, Charles fled. He ran away. He later turned himself in and was taken into custody. Well, the night after Charles turned himself in, 100 white men walked into the police station and in mask pulled Charles out and took him to the nearest tree, and they lynched him. And they killed him. This man had fought in World War I, had served honorably, was discharged honorably. And the reason why they lynched him is because he was uppity. He dared to say that his soldierism, his idea of a soldier was above the idea of white supremacy. Lunacy, but a fact. Now, did that stop any other black person from serving in the military? Do you not see blacks, Latinos, Asians, people from other countries serving in the military? Patriotism, the idea of wanting to believe America could be better, despite things like Charles Lewis, despite what we see and what we know. And that's history. Feel free to go look that up. Another thing that I wanted to bring, I wrote down notes today because though I am a veteran and I love Veterans Day and I love the honor and respect that veterans overall mostly are given, I would be remiss to not mention some of the things that have happened in this country. When you've heard me in previous weeks talk about Red Summer, and understand that Red Summer came after World War I. And that during that time, because blacks were coming back from World War I, soldiers coming back from service, dared to be, as they called Charles, uppity. Dared to say, I fought for freedom. This is not freedom. And as I told you a few moments ago, because we don't lose that morale, that patriotism when we come back, it has been drilled into us to expect America to be more than what you currently see. As Dr. King said, meet the promise of America, the democracy of America, that all men are created equal. Not just what you consider men, but all men are created equal. You know, I was thinking back because there's another big case that happened, and this happened in 1919, about a year after Charles Lewis was lynched. Whites, during what we will call become Red Summer, whites stormed into the areas of Washington, D.C., and a white mob attacked African-American soldiers who had brought their guns back from the war. And they did this because they used the same old trope of a white woman had been abused, raped, or whatever that the idea was, just different stories, different times that were made up. And so they stormed in and they started to abuse blacks. Well, these black servicemen, soldiers said, not on our watch. And they went out and they fought against these people, and many people died. Mike made that comment that someone said you can't be black and be a patriot. Well, those black men thought they were patriots. They were protecting their nation, protecting their families, their culture, their city, their neighborhoods. The same things they went over to go fight for, the same thing that white service people go fight for. And even though that happened, even though hundreds and hundreds of people were injured and brutally wounded, Woodrow Wilson, who you may have heard me on other sessions say was one of the, if not the most prejudiced president we've ever had, right? Woodrow Wilson, who had said when World War I started that the world must be made safe for democracy. Democracy means fairness for everyone. Woodrow Wilson sent 1,000 troops and to go fight on American soil with blacks to protect Washington, D.C. We have to understand these things as we celebrate Veterans Day and give honor to those men and women who dared to serve a country that didn't love them as equally. And you may be one of those who gets mad about me saying that, but I have to say it. Patriotism is bigger than race. Patriotism is, look, America has to be held to that, because that's, as Dr. King said, had America never made that promise, had America never wrote that in her Declaration, in her Constitution, in her laws, had she never said it, had she never uttered it, whispered it, then we couldn't hold her to that promise. But because America dared to say it, dared to believe it, then we must dare to believe it too, and we must hold America accountable for it. Those KKK members went to hell and deserved to die. Charles went to heaven and deserved to be. Well, a lot of these people who committed these racial crimes, they committed these racial crimes, Daniel, because society, the church, different entities had told them that this was in fact of God. This was of God, right? And so when you allow yourself the idea that cruelty and murder is supported by whatever God you claim that to be, and that is another mark of history. Me and my son often say, God wills it. A lot of men have died because another man uttered those words. But what God was that person serving? Wasn't a benevolent, loving God. It was a God of conquest, a God of this is mine. This is mine, regardless of if it was yours. God willed me to take it. That could even mean your life. Woodrow Wilson was a horrible person. We've touched on him several times on the Erudition Network in trying to get people to understand how bad Woodrow Wilson really was and what he did. But, you know, Wilson, it's amazing how you follow that lineage of Wilson to who Frank Delano Roosevelt was his Secretary of the Navy and was really a good friend of his. And FDR is loved by Democrats and liberals. But FDR did some horrendous things, right? He interned the Japanese. He turned his back on blacks. The first march on Washington was prevented only because FDR's wife stood in and begged A. Philip Randolph not to go out and march on Washington, because at the time they thought it would cause a racial uprising. And as we just looked at even after that, in 1942, when they went out and lynched Charles, right? When you go out there and look at what these people had done, the country was horrible, still in a horrible state. But, you know, there are things that happen in history that are a little strange. When FDR died and Truman became president, Truman put out an executive order to integrate the military. And one of the things that always stands, and I'm glad that you said that, Tyson, because it puts me to this point. Truman integrated the armed forces, and people were mad about it. But the reality of it was that Truman was trying to push back the idea of communism. The Khrushchev and the Russians were saying, how can you say that you're a democracy and you're the house of freedom for the world when you're out here killing black citizens in your street, your own citizens, because of the difference in color? Isn't that the same what the Nazis did to the Jews? Well, that struck a political chord. And at the time when we were establishing the UN, this was dangerous, right? Because you just seen countries go and invade another country to take them down, right? So in order to fight that back, Truman decided to integrate the armed forces. I don't say he did it just because he wanted to be fair and equal. He did it because it was needed to be done in order to push back the idea of uprising and turning blacks against the nation. But that mentality stayed in history. If you go look and you see how even into the civil rights movement, the 50s civil rights movement, they were constantly saying, even into the Black Panther Party, oh, this is communism. This is communism, right? They believed that the communists were pushing the civil rights movement because of what had been said in closed documents, right? But let's understand something too. Just because you integrate something doesn't mean that it is integrated, right? If the law says we should integrate, that doesn't mean that you are actually integrating. Hold on, I'll get back to that. I have a question, but it's not related to today's lesson. So why do a lot of black women get abortion? I don't know if they do. I don't know if they do. If you look at the birth rates, and I'll deviate for a moment and explain. If you look at the birth rates that in this country, that is not necessarily the case. I'm not saying that they don't get those abortions, but I think that we make that a political football that we throw around. The truth of the matter is that I think that there are, as women are becoming more autonomous in society without that patriarchy over them, they're going to make the decisions to do what they're going to do. Now, there are many layers to that, but I don't think it's a racial thing. I think that it's an equal thing that is happening in this country because of people's understanding that, hey, this is my body. No matter what we say legally, you can say your body, your choice, or I'm against it. In the end of the day, it's that individual making that decision, whether it be legally or illegally. It's just the reality. MLK said they never held themselves to the promise over there, but somewhere I read that the greatness of America was the right to protest for rights. There's more. I didn't. America that did not hold itself to the promise, but he also does make that point that it made that promise. It made it. Woodrow Wilson was a horrible president, and we're gonna have to do a special on that. He was a horrible president. He was a horrible person, and I don't wish evil on anyone. But he ended his presidency with having a stroke and basically his wife running the country in secret, and that is true. In order to basically keep him up, but he was a horrible person. He was a Dunning School, and that we'll have to get into that another day too. Archibald Dunning School professor who believed in the idea that blacks were less than. That's from his own writing. His own writing. But I wanted to make a point that even when, talking about presidents, we're talking about Truman, but even when Truman had integrated the armed forces, and you look back into the Korean War, right? As we get closer and closer to where we are right now, a little known fact in history is that Thurgood Marshall, who was the legal counsel for the NAACP and one of the counsels who took Brown versus Board Education to integrate the schools, before that, he was sent out to go intervene for black soldiers, because what was happening during Korea was that people like Douglas MacArthur, major well-known generals, but MacArthur is being the one because he had a very famous conversation with MacArthur. But what they were doing is they were putting black servicemen to death, and they were also sentencing them to hard labor for the rest of their lives. And the difference was they would not charge them with AWOL. If a black service member was AWOL, they wouldn't put him absent without leave, right? They would charge him with cowardice in the presence of the enemy. And right then, they would be basically up for charges to death, up and including death. And though some of those sentences were pushed down and they were actually given life sentences, they were still, this was a horrible situation that was happening in the armed forces under General Douglas MacArthur, the man who famously said, "Old soldiers don't die, they just fade away," and was loved and beloved. The one who got on the ship and signed the papers ending World War II. But General MacArthur was a bigot. He was a racist. And unfortunately, people like to say, well, he was a man of his time. No, he was a bigot. And there was a famous conversation that Thurgood Marshall had with Douglas MacArthur, where he asked him, he said, one of the few meetings he had with him, he said, you believe that blacks are inferior. And Douglas MacArthur said, yeah, they are inferior. No question about it. I have not seen any blacks yet that are spit and polished and can do what average or regular soldiers do. They're not qualified. That was the word he used. And when Marshall actually said, what is qualification? He said battle tested, etc. They run away. They're cowards. Now, there's no history in warfare that shows black men being cowards. Apparently, Mr. War College did not know to go look at the Fighting 54th. He did not go to look at the Harlem Hellcats. He didn't go look at any of those things. Well, what happened is Marshall asked him, he said, well, you saying that black folks aren't qualified to be integrated in your army? He said, not yet. Well, then Marshall, being smart, said, when I came here, there was a band that was playing at the ceremony over there. He's like, oh yeah, that's the army band. They were great. That's the headquarters band. They're beautiful. They play so well. And so then Marshall asked him, he said, well, General, now you're saying that nobody's qualified, but those men are qualified because they can play an instrument. Are you going to tell me that no Negro can play a horn? To which MacArthur got upset and dismissed him and said, okay, there's nothing else to say to this. And Marshall had to come to the conclusion that a lot of what was going on was racism. Now, I tell you that story because that's a historical story, and that's true. Go look it up. It could probably get more than what I paraphrased there. But it just goes to show you that even though we are integrated, doesn't mean we're integrated. I'm sorry, I've been ignoring some of you all's questions. Warren Harding was great. Yeah, he was. I mean, I really want to do some things and go into some of these presidents because I think that there's so much hidden history with the presidents that we can touch on. And some were good and some were bad. Some did a lot for people of color and some did horrendous things, people of color in the background. Mike, so how would you then present the idea of serving your country or the idea of patriotism to a young black man who may be interested in going to the military, but may be deterred because of the things that he sees around him in regards to how this country sees him? So I'm going to tell you, and Tyson's on here, and he might second this. The one thing about the military, Mike, is that it's kind of, I've heard it said it's a fishbowl. You can't, once you go in the military, don't get me wrong, there's racism and some things that you see in the military that aren't right. But for the most part, you have blacks and whites and Latinos and Asians and people who have never been around other cultures who are forced, and I say it just that way, forced to not only work with those other people, those other cultures, but now they have to trust their lives to them. And so I can't go call you some racial epitaph. I can't go and give you some malparism that's wrong and evil when I know, man, you might have my back. You might be the person that pulls me out of a space before I drown or pulls me out of something before I get shot in the head. And understand that there's a brotherhood there. Some of my best friends, people who I've met in the service, who I would trust, right? Because I know that they got my back and I got theirs. And it didn't matter the color, right? He has my back, I got his back. But there has to be a discussion. And when we talk to our brothers and sisters out there, we should not discourage them from serving in the military. Because for every person that serves in the military, for every culture that goes into the military, our nation is stronger, wiser, right? People who are isolated to only a white mentality, only a black mentality, can't see both sides. They're manipulated and their minds are only seeing what they've been taught and what they've known. That's why you go through boot camp. Boot camp is to refocus your mind in a way that is different than what you were raised with. It is to get you ready to be a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or whatever. That's what it's for. And to try to strip you of those prejudices, those ideas of I'm more or you're less. And so I would tell a person that you have to look at it that way. Stop looking at it through the eyes of just your color. I've sat down with many different service members of many different cultures and backgrounds, and they've talked to me about things that they grew up with, racist, horrendous things. And yet at the end of the day, when we had a discussion and they would tell me, that's the way I was taught. Well, now you see by example that that's not the reality. We're a stronger nation, a better nation when we bring other people in. I'm going to get some of these other questions. Hillary Clinton, I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision. I am really in awe of her, and there are a lot of lessons we can learn from her. Okay. There is a striking kinship between our movement and Martin Luther King Jr. I'm going to address all of these, y'all. I'm just kind of getting through because getting backlogged. Gloria Miller, Jesus Christ, what a mess. Warren Harding was the most corrupt president ever. He literally gave his children. I have no experience in politics. There are some things with Harding that are bad, and there are some things with Harding that aren't so bad. We're going to have to get into that. You guys, you've piqued my interest to go into it further. After his assassination, he was the most popular president of the 20th century. So assassination does do some things, right? It does do some things, and it makes us see people differently. But we're gonna do, I promise you, we're gonna do something on Harding. Ali threw his gold medal in the river because even though he came back defending America's enemies, which was a huge propaganda win for America, a personal win for his legacy, he was still treated as other. He still couldn't sit at the lunch counter. I had a warrant, and he's definitely racist. When Ali died, he said that F did this guy do. I've done more than he did. I said, nobody knows your name, bro. I was an E7. I couldn't be demoted. Let me tell you, if you've ever talked to me, Muhammad Ali is one of my heroes. And one of the reasons why is because that knowledge of self. Here's a man that went over to go compete in the Olympics and was excited about it. And loved the idea of going to represent his country. And you're absolutely right. Came back to Kentucky, Louisville, and was not even allowed to sit at the lunch counter. This was a man who was stifled because the people who backed him as a boxer professionally initially were a group of white men who paid him a salary. And even though Ali had a very well-known knowledge of self from his father and his mother, couldn't share that. But what Ali did, if that warrant didn't know, is that he inspired both in his wrongdoing and in his positivity. And he would say that. He gave an identifier to African-American young men like myself. He gave an identifier to let you understand that you could be something and you are worth something, and that the knowledge of self has been hidden from you. You guys are arguing over Harding. I tell you what, next week I will give you all an hour and we will sit there and talk about some of these presidents, not just Harding, and we'll do that. Muhammad Ali on intermarriage. No intelligent black man or black woman in his or her white mind wants white boys, white girls coming to their homes to marry their black. So are you quoting Ali from a time before when he was in the Nation of Islam? Because that would be unfair, right? That would be unfair, Gloria, because his mentality changed over time, right? and understand what he was saying even back then. He's saying no intelligent black man or black woman. And I want you to think about the time in which he said this. It is right. Black mind wants white boys and white girls coming in their homes to marry black sons and daughters. Right? We understand that this is a person that understood his history, had been taught his history. We understand that when whites tried to marry, and they did, right, before that, or had relationships with blacks. We talked a couple of weeks ago about the idea of the quarter, right? The quarter blood of black, and how people became, started having relationships with folks who were passing, and what they did to that, right? And how they played into this whole situation of having a black woman on the side. I will put the link for that episode of Erudition in here because we went over that. And so understand, coming from that mentality, no, in his mind, no one wants to see you coming to my house to marry my son or daughter, because what harm is that going to bring to my son or daughter? Given historical background of what had happened to that point. Now, as time has gone on, as we've integrated, as we better understand each other, again, that's looking at a parallax mentality. I don't really see all of you, and you don't really see all of me. So there's a difference there. So when we read those historical words, we have to look at those words and what they were being said at that time and why they were being said. 99% of people I came into work with, we worked together just fine. Even the racist suspect people. It's hard to be racist when you count on someone for your livelihood every day. When you see the humanity firsthand, that has been denied to you your whole life. You're forced to accept reality. Preach. Perfect. You are forced to accept the reality of what you see and interact with. That is the power of intermingling and talking to each other. Because, see, no matter how racist you are, no matter how bigoted you've been raised, when that man is next to you is defending you against life and death, that veteran who was served with you, you never forget it. Let me tell you a quick story. I met a man several years ago. It was during the honor flights. These were World War II veterans. This was a white guy. He had served in Europe. And he gave my son some dollars, some money. And I told him he didn't have to do that. Yeah, at this time, this man had to be in his early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, wheelchair bound. And I leaned over and said, you have to do that. And he grabbed my hand and he pulled me close. He said, I appreciate that you brought your sons here. And I said, oh, no, where? And he said, no. He said, I have a friend, one of my best friends in the world was a black guy. He just passed away last year. He said, I met him because we were in Europe. We were taking this bridge and an explosion went off. And he said, I told everybody duck down. And I told all my guys who were with us as they were getting up, I said, hey, don't rub your hands in your face because of the shrapnel and the dirt, and it'll blind you. And so if there are any dirt or things on you, don't rub that blackness all, in your eyes. And he said that there was a voice that said, well, I can't rub this blackness off of me. And he said, I looked over and it was another group of guys who was with that. It was this black guy. I think he said his name was Larry. I think his name was Larry. And he said that we became good friends. And he said that man saved my life 3 times. I would not be here. I would not have had my kids. I would not have had my family except for that black man. And he said he always made me laugh. And then people would say, how you friends when I first got back? He said, how are you friends? He said, I'm from Memphis. I'm from the South of Tennessee. He said they would say, how you friends with that black man? And he said, that black man saved my life. That black man opened my eyes. He said, when I see your sons and I see your service, I know how important that is. And it touched me. We live in a world that can show some most horrendous things ever. But what we do see here is that there is humanity and that there is love. There is love. I see you guys are sitting here arguing. Let me see. Muhammad Ali got rich by espousing racial hatred and by mafia rigging fights for him. Ali was involved with organized crime and had intimate knowledge of this accident. So that's arguable. And I'm going to tell you why that's arguable. Because I'm not going to tell you that organized crime is not involved in boxing. As a matter of fact, Ali kind of sat there and told you when he was called in front of the Senate to actually talk about it. That's historical. But Sonny Liston would actually work for the mob. There were boxers like Joe Louis, different people. Let's understand what that means. So I'm not justifying the mob. I'm not at all. Al Capone was one of the reasons why we have the music, the black music and the jazz music became so popular. The mob did that because of the speakeasies. So when we say because somebody was in boxing, that automatically made them a criminal, that does not necessarily line up. That doesn't mean that every musician was a criminal. What that meant is that that musician during the times of the Great Depression, during the times when there was no money, had to be able to feed his family. And then the only ways to go feed my family is go plant in this speakeasy, go plant in this club that's owned by the mob. That's what I'm going to go do. If the only way for me to box is to go box, but the mob runs all of the bankroll, then I got to box. But that doesn't mean that everybody is a criminal. Now, the other comment that you made here is that he espoused racial hatred. Well, so arguably, we could say the same thing about Marcus Garvey. We could say the same thing about Carter G. Woodson. We could say the same thing about Elijah Muhammad. We could Malcolm X. We could even go look at some things from Dr. King and say that he espoused the idea of some racial hatred because he dared to call out white preachers during the letter from Birmingham jail. We can go further and further into claiming those things, but we have to look at that time. We have to look at the full. It's like reading a verse in the Bible and not reading the whole chapter. We have to understand what we're saying with that before we throw that out here. Because if we just throw that out here, then it becomes out here and it sits out here as a fact. And one thing you will know about Erudition, that's not what I do. I will go with you. We will talk about these things, but the factuality. And I will answer every question that you have in there. I guarantee you, as soon as this episode is over, if I do not get to it while we're on it. That is another thing that I do. You guys are really getting into an argument. It's about the man standing next to you. There you go. Be informed. I love that you all ask questions. Hey, Gloria, I don't want you to misrepresent what I'm saying. I want you to ask questions, throw names, put things out here because the problem, the issue with our society, American society, is that so much history has been hidden to us, so much has been given to us that is false, right? So many things have been thrown out to us that aren't right, that too often I like to say regurgitate them because the body can't accept it. The body knows, hey, that don't sound right. So we spew it out to other people and then they become infected with it. What I really want for us to do is if you believe those things, I want you to go and give me the context of what it is. And we can discuss that freely. I mean, I'm honest. I love a good debate. Anybody that knows me know we can sit there and I will tell you, prove me wrong. But just know that I am not going to just take any kind of sophistry, any kind of statements that don't seem quite right because of what I do know. I'm not wishy-washy. I ascribe to mathematical certainty. No wishy-washy man will ever service. Mathematical certainty. So that tells you that you're a logical person. And that means that a logical person, right, is wise enough to be able to know when they can be wrong. Right? That's what that means. Wisdom and logic, because nothing is necessarily a certainty. It's a certainty for the moment. It's what we can prove at the moment. But when someone else comes in with a different theory, a different understanding, and then that is proven right, we have to, as logical people, accept that to be true. Not at all. I just told you, I have no problem in proving anything. And if you come onto this channel, I guarantee you will watch, and I will answer every question, everything that you just said in here. I will give you the historical fact about it. And I would challenge you to go on and look at the very first thing that we ever put on for Erudition. The first thing that I ever said was sources. Sources. Erudition provides primary and secondary sources. We predominantly try to get the primary. We want the word of the people as it happened. If we can't get that, then we want those who were around them as it happened, that it can be proven. So if you want to believe, so you're telling me that mathematics and everything is a certain, you're talking to a very intelligent person when it comes to mathematics. I'm not philosophizing with you. I'm telling you that anything you said on here, like I think you said presidents before George Washington, right? And you give all of these names, and what you're telling us this history, but you're not giving us the full context of that history. Because what you're talking about is the Constitutional Congress. You're talking about these men who signed this before the country was ever established. If you did not have a country, then how do you have a president? I will go with you down that anyway. So it's fine with me. And I'm not arguing with you. I want you to understand, I love to debate, and we can debate all day if I got the time. She's a mechanic. How come schools never teach about Sally Hemings? Okay, I mean, I think they do now. I think her name is mentioned, right? But they don't speak about a lot of different things as it goes to founders of this country having affairs and relationships with blacks. There's a lot of things about history you may not know. Do you know who Jonathan Edwards is? Did you know who Jonathan Edwards was? Jonathan Edwards was a major theologian in this country. He is the grandfather of Aaron Burr, right? And what happened was, that's the person who shot, and you should know this because people love Hamilton, who shot Hamilton, right? But his grandfather was this amazing preacher who was still talked about today because apparently his progeny did so well and became senators and all of this and changed the country. So it's just one of those situations that a lot of things that aren't passed aren't talked about. So if some people who know me, they will address me as petty officer, whatever, right? Because I was in the Navy. Well, that was my title in the Navy, and that particular section. I think that that's just the issue, right? All right, people, we have come up on our hour, and I've enjoyed it. Gloria, please feel free to come back next week, and if you will see, and I will try to make sure. I've been negligent and putting some of the sources back into the YouTube channel, so we'll do that for you and answer some of those questions. But this has been fun. Hey, have a great rest of your Veterans Day. Thank you all for making this an engaging hour. I'll see you next Thursday too. Daniel, good to see you. Cool, Mike, thanks. I know, my brother. You got to learn for yourself, right? But that's that generation. It's Google, 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 Google. So, all right. I'll see you all next week. Thank you for your time. You have a blessed, wonderful day. Share this this episode, and also subscribe. Get people to subscribe on YouTube as we try to grow further and further and further. I thank you all. Until next week, have a blessed and wonderful rest of your week and a blessed rest of your day. Have a good one.